last time we stopped at, we are still talking about how to meditate, and we've been talking about how to meditate for many, many weeks already. It's a very long subject, but it is challenging to make a long subject interesting. So we try to tie a relationship between meditation and all the realities of life, all the facets of life. And we also quote with reference to very important sutras and abhidhammas about how to meditate. And basically, we based our literature on the 6 gates to meditation. And let's just have a brief review as to what we've been talking about. So we've been talking about meditation. And meditation is not just, meditation is to sit and keep quiet and relax. Meditation is in 2 parts. The calming part, we call it the stabilization, mental stabilization, how to stabilize your mind, calming the mind and relax the body. That's the first part. But meditation is more than just calming the mind. It's also introspection, which is an insightful contemplation, we call it. And I quote a few very important references from the 6 subtle gates to meditation. Calming is the initial method here. Calming is the initial method through which one is able to suppress mental afflictions. So nowadays, a lot of people have depression, jealousy, anxiety, fear, hatred, arrogance, lots of these mental afflictions, or how do we call it? Or fetters, we call them fetters, F-E-T-T-E-R-S, fetters, mental afflictions. And calming the mind is to suppress these mental afflictions. I remember when I was in Hong Kong 3 weeks ago, I almost scared my audience out. Because when I first started, I said, right now we have more than 800 people in here, and I can predict within the next 50 years, half of you guys will be gone. And they all get scared. Well, how come half of you guys will be gone? I think who is over 50 years of age? Well, a lot of people raise their hands over 50 years of age. In 50 years, you'll be gone. If you live with 100 years. Life is fleeting, life is impermanent, and that's what the Buddha was talking about. But every one of us, we don't think that way. We think everything is, there's always a tomorrow, there's always a next year, but when it comes to think of it, life is in between a breath. If you don't continue this current breath, and if this current breath does not continue for 5 minutes, there's no oxygen in your brain, you're gone. So life is in between a breath. That's the reason why we're using the breath to meditate on. Now you know why we use the breath and not a candle flame. Because that's the vitality of all your thinking, all your bodily movements, every thought is the breath. That's the reason why you're using the breath. All right, calming is the initial method through which one is able to suppress mental afflictions. But suppress is not good enough. You just suppressed it. It's just like when wild grass is growing up in the middle of all your rhododendrons. You want to get rid of your grass. If you just use a piece of rock to suppress it down, the wheat is going to grow it again. You just put your rock and push down the weeds. You think the weeds will disappear? The weeds will sprout again. Your jealousy, your hatred, your anxiety, your depression, your fear, your worries, it will sprout again. During the meditation, you learn how to suppress them. If you learn it well, then you can suppress them. By suppressing them, you're calming down your mind, but not for long. So we still have to do introspection, which is the next step, which is the primary essential through which one is able to eliminate delusions. That is to completely pull out the weeds, put the plastic in, put the rocks in, and it will never grow again. Make sure that you eliminate all your delusions. So introspection is very important. We have talked about the calming part for a few months already. For those who are just first time coming here, probably you don't know what we're talking about, because we've been talking about calming or stabilization for a few months. And now we're in introspection. I'm just doing a review in here, introspection. Next up, calming is the provision with which one nurtures the consciousness. We need to nurture our consciousness. Why do we need to nurture our consciousness? What is our consciousness made up of? What comes out from the consciousness? All your delusions, all the mental afflictions, all the fetters, we call them, comes out from consciousness. We need to purify the consciousness. But before you need to purify your consciousness, you must learn how to clean up the dirt. And calming is an initial step where you perform the cleaning. So it nurtures the consciousness. Nowadays, we don't know how to nurture our consciousness. Introspection is the technique which stimulates the development of spiritual understanding. So after you have nurtured your consciousness, you need to stimulate your development for spiritual understanding. You need to go forward to have the stimulation and development of spiritual understanding. So one step forward. Next, calming is supreme cause for the dhyana absorption, and introspection is the origin of wisdom. You need wisdom, finally, to arrive at nirvana. So both samatha and vipassana, they are the wings of a bird, the two wings of a bird. A bird cannot fly with just one wing, so you need two wings to fly. You need calming and you need introspection, or you need stabilization and you need introspection. So we got this clear, right? This is just a review. And next. So we've been talking about stabilization, which is the same as calming. We're talking about counting, following, and stabilization. And now we are at introspection, which is the wisdom part, the vipassana part. And introspection, we need a lot of time to talk about it, because that is very important. That's the wisdom. In Buddhism, you have to build up wisdom, not just meditating and calming your mind and that's it. In addition to calming your mind, you have to build up your wisdom for your spiritual understanding, your spiritual development. So that part is in three aspects: the introspection part, the turning part, and the purification part. And we've been on the introspection part for 2 months already. And then I went away to Hong Kong for lectures, and then I'm returning. I'm taking up the introspection part again. Probably that would last for about 4 or 5 lectures. I don't want to deal with it for too long, because I want to go to turning and purification. But introspection is really so important. So we need to probe into it into a little bit more detail. All right, so let's take to the next. The cultivation of introspection. Now we get back to introspection. So how to cultivate introspection? It is absolutely important to have the right introspection. So what is the wrong introspection? The wrong introspection is using the wrong idea. For example, if you are using egoistic introspection, that's the wrong introspection. I hate this guy, and I don't like it, and I like that. This is rich, this is poor, this is ugly, this is beautiful. You're using a lot of your own built-in introspection, the egoistic introspection, the hatred introspection, the ignorant introspection. That's not the right introspection. You have to use the right introspection. It is quite important that you use the right introspection when you are working on the introspection side, the insightful meditation side. What is the right introspection? The Sanskrit language is samprajnaya, jing. Right introspection, samprajnaya, means clear and right understanding, clear and right knowing with full awareness, guided by prajna, guided by wisdom. So your understanding has to be guided by the wisdom. So what is prajna, which is wisdom, you need prajna to fit in introspection. If you don't have the right prajna, you cannot fit in the introspection. Introspection is the method, is the tool. Prajna is the target, the intermediate target. And having a tool and having an intermediate target would lead you to the final destination. The intermediate target is still not the final destination, but you need that target. So, what is prajna? Prajna could be conceptual prajna, 叫做文字般若, conceptual prajna. And then you also need introspective prajna. And then you also need true prajna. So when we look at these three kinds of prajna, of wisdom, we know that the very basic, the very initial step we need to do is to have concepts in terms of a language. How do we think? How do we introspect inside? How do we think? We need certain concepts to think, right? And these concepts are written in words or in pictures. We cannot think without concepts. But you need to have the right concepts. If you have a concept of egoism, that's not the right concept. If you have the concept of cruelty, that's not the right concept. If you have the concept of violence and sex, that's not the right concept. You need to have the right conceptual concept, the prajna. But having just the concept is not enough. You need to introspect. You need to contemplate on the worded concept. In other words, you have the concept, you have to think it out. You have to think it out in such a way that you can use it as a practice. It's just like in studying at university. If you're taking economics or psychology, you learn all the words. You swallow up all these books of psychology, books of economics and finance, but you don't know how to apply them because you never use these concepts. So you need to have introspective. You need to apply these concepts, economics concepts, financial concepts. So this is scientific. You need to apply them. If you learn, you have the concept of non-self. You need to use the non-self concept to practice your daily life so that you have altruistic attitude to life. You're not selfish attitude to life. So that's a practice that you need to do, right? So introspective prajna. And then with introspective prajna, that would lead you to true prajna. And true prajna will lead you to a nirvana, the right understanding. It's easy to know about conceptual prajna. It's easy to know about introspective prajna. But what is true prajna? What is true prajna? True prajna is a state of pure consciousness that transcends worldly concepts or belief systems that might impede perfect wisdom. Many, many concepts stop our perfect wisdom. For example, concepts of violence, concepts of, so many concepts impede perfect wisdom. Concepts of, say for example, killing animals for food, concepts of polluting the environment for the purpose of self-interest, concepts of wars, concepts of violence, concepts of crime, that impede perfect wisdom. So that true prajna transcends all these concepts, worldly concepts and belief systems that might impede perfect wisdom. Number 2, pure consciousness that transforms the 3 parts of temporal consciousness: perception, vinaya, thinking, and emotion, chitta, into the ultimate introspection of the true nature of existence and reality. That required some explanations. Our consciousness is in 3 parts. Our mind, we call, so to speak, is in 3 parts. The perception part, which we call in the Pali language vijnana. The thinking part, in the Pali language we call it mano. And the emotional part, we call it chitta. And the perception part is through all the senses to perceive reality. You perceive all externalities. And after this perception, it gets into your thinking, which is in 2 parts. The rational thinking part, which is the mano, and emotional thinking part, which is your chitta. The mano, the thinking part, or the chitta, the emotional part, they're always at a tug of war, fighting against each other. The emotional part wants us to have depression, fear, anxiety, selfishness. And then the rational part says, no, you can't have this. So they're always fighting against each other. The rational part always fighting against each other. And unfortunately, which happens to you and me all the time, is always the emotional part that is in control. Because we've been habitually emotional. Why do we have depression? Because we're dominated by the emotional mind. We must learn to let go of this emotional mind. We are the victim of the chitta, of the emotional mind. Why are we the victim of the emotional mind? Because all this chitta, the emotional mind, is not just of this life. It's all the accumulation of previous lives' emotions, the power, the karmic energy of not only this life, previous life, were brought forward, and this is highly dominating over the thinking or the mano mind. And Buddhism, or true prajna, is to balance it first, and finally it has a paradigm shift to take over the emotional mind. Are you willing to get the paradigm shift? To shift it over? From the worldly emotional mind to that prajna, wisdom, in which you have high wisdom, then you're on your way to nirvana. You're free from suffering. You're free from emotions. Don't you want to be free from emotions? Or you always want to be buried in emotions? We don't want to have emotions. We want to get away from emotions. Who wants to be emotional? Who wants to be dominated by the emotional mind? Put up your hands. Who wants to have depression all the time? Who wants to have anxiety, fear, worry, hatred, jealousy, arrogance? We know those are wrong, but it seems that we habitually think that way, that we can't get rid of them. That's why depression is suicidal, because we can't stand it. Finally, it burns out our ego, suppressed the respect, and carry out the suicidal attempt. We have to change it. We have to have this paradigm shift. And it's right there. It's in the Buddhist teaching. It's not about just blind faith to believe in the Buddha. It's how to practice this conceptual prajna, develop it to introspective prajna, and develop to finally the true prajna all by yourself. Not God. If God can do something about it, He would have done it. You don't have to request. You just blindly believe in it and think that there was an external source that will help you. No, you got to help yourself. You can't just always depend on the doctor's medicine, the doctor's advice. You got to build up this confidence that you can change it. And you can. The Buddha said you can. And such introspection is the prajna that leads to enlightenment. That's true prajna. Still, that is not the true meaning of prajna. Just for the purpose of bringing out some meaning, because true prajna is unspeakable. True prajna is inconceivable. True prajna cannot be conveyed by words and concepts, because you're beyond words and concepts. But beyond words and concepts, we cannot explain it. So we have to use words and concepts. For the purpose of explaining it, we just put down some words. And now we know that in introspection, we're talking about just about introspection. We finished up with calming. We finished up with stabilization. Now we're in the introspection part. In the introspection, we know that the tools to carry out this introspection is in three parts: conceptual prajna, introspective prajna, and true prajna. In order to have true prajna, or to arrive at that state in which we say true prajna, we need to have conceptual prajna. In other words, we need to learn the concepts. If we don't even know the concepts, how can we introspect? If we don't have concepts, how can we think? You think you can think without concepts? You think you can think without words? No. We always use concepts to think, but we don't want to use the wrong concepts. So the Buddha told us that there are an immeasurable amount of conceptual prajna. And all these immeasurable amount of concepts, the Buddha had been talking about these for 49 years. Since after his enlightenment, he started to talk about it for 49 years. It's all been written down in the three canons of the Buddhist teaching: the Vinaya, the Sutra, and the Abhidhamma. All these are there. Do you care to want to know about them? That's prajna that leads you to happiness. That's prajna to get rid of the depression. That's the prajna to get you the wisdom, to guide you to be happier in your life, to help others to resolve problems. But how many people are really interested in doing it? It's very important that we know the right concepts. And I have spent a lot of time on explaining these concepts, and the concepts that have been expounded by the Buddha for his 49 years of his life, remaining life after nirvana, after enlightenment, and it's all in the Buddhist teaching. But the Buddhist teaching contains, especially in the Chinese literature, because most of the translation have been in Chinese, is in billions of words. And we always say that the Buddhist teaching in the Chinese language, if one lives up to 100 years old, probably you can only glance through those literature once. You don't have enough time to read them all. It's like an ocean of information. And slowly they have been translated into many, many different languages, also in English too, especially with Naptimatrata, consciousness, the study of consciousness, have been translated into English and in other languages. And so this conceptual prajna, an accumulation of 49 years of the Buddhist teaching in written words, concepts, it's like an ocean of information. It's like a whole ocean of information. How do we learn? When we look at an ocean, we say, how do we know the taste of the ocean? How do we know? No, knowing the ocean, what I mean by analogy is knowing the taste of the ocean. How do I know the taste of the ocean? Looking at the ocean. And many of these later philosophers told us that you don't have to drink up the whole ocean to know the taste of the ocean. You just scoop up a few and you know the taste. You just scoop up a few very important concepts and introspect on it. And that will really give you a lot of help, because it's impossible to drink up the whole ocean. So it's impossible just always looking for videos and books. You've been reading hundreds of these books, you have been viewing hundreds of these videos, and it should nowhere because you're not concentrating on it. You're just reading it, viewing it casually without really bringing it into practice. Why don't we just concentrate in a few very important concepts, really going through the introspective prajna part of it and really analyze it, investigate on it, and really review it in your mind all the time as your vigilance guards to telling you what to do. And I've been going through all these concepts. I've gone through the 4 seals of the Dharma. I used already 1 hour to explain that. Impermanence, non-self, suffering, and nirvana. The 4 seals. You really have to understand it. If you missed it out, you can always go into Google, the 4 seals. Go into Google, what are the 4 seals of the Dharma? Impermanence, what's the meaning of impermanence? What's the meaning of non-self? Why would we say that we don't have a self? We don't have an ego. We just think that we have a self. We don't have a self. Why do we have to go through all this suffering? Why are there sufferings? Are there sufferings? And what is nirvana? That you have to learn. Next, I already explained it using a couple of hours, at least 2 hours to explain paticca samuppada, which explain the 12 links of originations of life, starting from avijja, sankara, vedana, namarupa, salayatanam, passa, vedanta, tanha, upadana, bhava, jati, jaramarana, and going to avijja. I don't know if you know what I mean. Probably if you come for the first time, you know what I mean. The 12 links of life origination. I went through it in detail, probably in 2-3 hours. And if you missed it out, you can always get into Google and try to find out paticca samuppada, a very important concept in life. And then last time I stopped at the Noble Eightfold Ways. I stopped at Noble Eightfold Ways. And I plan to do a few more important concepts, and then I will go on to the next one, which is turning, because I cannot deal with this all the time. I can use 1 year to explain the ocean. I don't even know the ocean myself. I only a part of the ocean. How can I tell you the whole ocean? I don't know the ocean. So, and also you got to watch out too. Some part of the ocean is polluted. You know why some part of the ocean is polluted? There are people who pollute the teaching by introducing their own to a teaching. So we've got to know what's the real taste of the ocean. That's just a sideline that I want to tell you. Okay, the Noble Eightfold Ways. Let's go through the Noble Eightfold Ways. What are the Noble Eightfold Ways? Right perspective, right orientation, right speech, right action, right lifestyle, right effort, right introspection, and right mental equilibrium. These are the very important concepts, the Noble Eightfold Way. Not just knowing the words. You have to know the meaning of it. Buddhism starts from this Noble Eightfold Ways. Don't look for anything else. You have put many books on your shelf that you only flip through 10 pages and you put them aside. Now, we want to know every one of these in detail. And we always want to think about it, practice it, apply it to daily life, and really memorize and know and see everything from the perspective of the Noble Eightfold Ways. And we want to do it bit by bit and bit by bit. Someone may ask, I'm still very young, I'm a teenager. I want to go to work. Does it help me in my work? Does it help me to make more money? Does it help me to be happier? Does it help me to look for a boyfriend or girlfriend? If you know these 8 Noble Eightfold Ways, that would greatly help you to be successful in whatever you're doing, not just in enlightenment. The right perspective, right orientation, right speech, right action, right lifestyle, right effort, right introspection, right mental equilibrium. If you know these, that will make you happier in your life. That will help you to resolve all suffering, all problems. That will help you to identify problems, introduce ways to solve these problems in everything you are doing, not just in enlightenment. You can even find a half-foot approach of finding a solution to a case of problems. I came out from a school dealing with management. I was from U of T, MBA. Nowadays, a lot of MBAs in the streets. In those days, there are not many MBAs. Now everybody is an MBA. And in MBA, we have to learn how to solve problems, how to identify problems, how to introduce ways to solve problems, how to make sure that problems are solved. And I find that this all fit in. And I don't want to start right perspective. I want to start right perspective in the next session. The right perspective. How do you see things in the right perspective? Don't try to see things in a twisted, fallacious, vicious perspective. How do we do that? We'll leave that for next session.